This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cora product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting inside of your vagina. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora today, and you'll receive your first month supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 140. Welcome to the 140th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. I get a lot of questions from women who've come off of hormonal contraceptives recently, whether it's the pill or any of the other hormonal options. And I think one of the biggest shocks to women is that when you come off of the pill, your cycles typically don't come back perfectly immediately. And it really is counter to everything that we've been told and everything that we've been taught. What I'm talking about in today's episode is the very real transition period that happens when you come off of the pill, especially after long-term use. If you've been using it for, 3, 4, 5 years or more, 10 years, and then you come off of it, you can expect there to be a period of time where your body is actually transitioning and healing from years of taking those exogenous hormones. I would like to invite you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work with me if you have found yourself in a similar situation where you're struggling to figure out what's happening in your charts. You're not really sure what's going on with your mucus and your temperatures, because if you've found yourself in a situation where you've recently come off of the hormones, you may have already discovered that your cycles just are not what you thought they would be. Yeah, I would encourage you to check out my Work With Me page and take a look at the programs that I offer. Essentially what I do with clients is take them through the method so that they really have a good understanding of what's happening in their bodies, really clear understanding of mucus and temperature. And then, after we get the basics down, it really shifts to having a deeper understanding of your body and how your health and your menstrual cycle are connected, and how you can really tell a lot about what's happening health-wise just by paying attention to your menstrual cycle chart. So that's the essence of the work that I do. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work with me, and you can set up a free 15-minute consultation with me if you have questions about my programs or if you just want to check to see if it would be a good fit. And before we jump into today's episode, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. So many of you have heard about the tampon tax. That's often how it's referred to. But essentially, in a number of countries, and depending on if you live in the United States and a number of states, menstrual hygiene products are still subject to tax. So in Canada, it's a little bit different. Menstrual products were subject to sales tax up until 2015, after lots of protesting. But in 38 states in the United States, as of the time of this recording, menstrual hygiene products, tampons, pads, are considered quote unquote non-essential and are still subject to what we refer to as tampon tax. One of the things that I love about Cora is that they're taking a stand against these issues. You may think that it's not a big deal, but if you're listening and you've ever had a period, you know that menstrual products are absolutely essential. You can't even imagine that someone would even think for a minute that they are not essential products. That doesn't even make sense. It shows a really strong double standard and a really serious political issue that even to this day, it's that simple act of classifying menstrual products as quote unquote essential or non-essential still hasn't even just been taken care of, right? So what I love about what Cora has done is actually incorporated their beliefs and feelings about this tax into their business model. When you purchase tampons from Cora, you don't pay tampon tax. If there's any tax on the products, they actually cover the cost because they strongly believe that as women, we shouldn't have to pay tax on those products because obviously, as we know, they are essential items. So in addition to taking care of you in terms of using 100% organic cotton, free of synthetic materials and pesticides and toxins, when you purchase these tampons, you are not subject to tampon tax because if you happen to live in a state where they're still taxing you for that, they actually cover the cost. So lots of great reasons to check out Cora. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora And when you sign up, you actually get your first month's supply of tampons free of charge. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. Thank you for joining me today. I am really excited to share with you today's episode. There's a few topics that have come up on the podcast as I've been recording different episodes with guests, and also as I've been working with my groups. I have, at the time of this recording, I'm in the midst of my April group programs, and I have two amazing groups of women who I'm taking through the program and really helping them to get their fertility awareness knowledge, to gain confidence in their ability to chart so that they can use the method, whether they're trying to conceive or trying to avoid pregnancy, really confidently. But of course, another important aspect of the program is to really share the knowledge of how to use your menstrual cycle as essentially the fifth vital sign of your health, so that you can really figure out if something's going on, if something's awry, if something looks, if your cycles aren't falling into normal parameters, to really help you connect that knowledge with the specific things that you could do, or where you should go, or how to figure out what is going on in the background. So that is what prompted me to record this episode for you today. So I wanted to go solo because I have some really important things I wanted to share. So the topic of today's show is hormonal birth control, essentially, and managing that whole process of coming off of hormonal birth control and really aligning yourself with the reality of what happens when you come off of hormonal birth control. So the reason that this is so important for me to share is because on a regular basis, I get a lot of emails and comments and questions, and often it's from women who have just come off of hormonal contraceptives and are feeling really confused. And I think that is what often leads them to me, whether it's a search that they are searching for information. I have some information on my blog, several articles about coming off of hormonal birth control and those types of things. And I've spoken about it on the show before, or whether that's what brought you to this podcast today. You were doing a search for birth control and you found this episode. And so, there's so much that is missing from the conversation around hormonal birth control. So one of the key things that I hear from women all the time, so my clients and women who comment on the blog or in my private Facebook group, just however, you communicate with me, is that, I went to my doctor because I know that I want to have a baby in the next year or two. And I asked if I should come off of hormonal birth control early. My doctor told me no, because my doctor told me that when I come off of birth control, I'm going to conceive right away. And so that's a good place to start. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to come to you today and record this episode. So first of all, from my perspective, I feel that it is actually unethical and inaccurate to tell a woman that ever. Because there is no one in this world that can tell you that. No one can tell you, oh, you're going to get pregnant right away when you come off of the pill. Because we don't know what's going to happen when you come off the pill. That's the first thing. There are no guarantees that you're going to get your period right away. So some women get their period right away. Some women get pregnant right away. We all know that. Some women don't. Some women take several months to get their period back at all. Some women's periods come back, but they don't get pregnant right away. And so there's a lot of different factors. So first of all, they can say it, but it's just completely unethical from my perspective. I'm trying to think of a better word, but I feel like unethical is the only word that's going to fit right now. But yeah, unethical for you to tell a woman that she's just going to conceive right away after coming off of hormonal birth control, because we just don't know. And so what's really important to know, first of all, just to take into context and into consideration as we're having this conversation today. Well, I guess it's a one-sided conversation because I'm just talking. But the research supports, so it's a well-established fact in the research that when women come off of hormonal birth control, there is a delay in the return of their fertility. So I feel like that's a really important place to start, because the idea that you're just going to get pregnant right away is just not actually a thing that you can promise people or that you should be saying. And then the other factor that's really important that I want to share with you for you to consider is that even if you are a healthy woman who is not on hormonal contraceptives, if you've been using condoms or if you've been using fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy, when you switch to trying, it doesn't mean that you're going to get pregnant that very first cycle. So part of this conversation is really aligning your understanding and appreciation of your fertility with what this actually looks like. And so I want to share with you my own personal experience of this, and then I'm going to share some research with you. And so I was actually talking with a client last night at the time of recording this. And I hadn't thought about this for a while, but, I was working with a client and she is not actively trying to get pregnant, but we were talking about, what happens in the future when she's going to switch to trying to conceive. And so it actually reminded me of my first experience trying to conceive. For those of you who have been listening for a really long time, you'll know that I discovered fertility awareness when I was like 18 or 19. And from then, that has been my method of birth control. So I've used that in conjunction with condoms in my fertile window. I've used it in conjunction with withdrawal and alternative sex around my fertile window. But for what it's worth, I haven't been on hormones since I was 18. And at the time of this recording, I'm 34. Yeah, I think that's right. And so that's a long time. Like that's a lot of years. And so I didn't start trying to conceive ever until after my partner and I decided to, when I think I was 29. So that would mean that I was essentially using fertility awareness for 10 years to avoid pregnancy. So you can imagine my utter shock and surprise when the first month that my husband and I tried to conceive, I didn't get pregnant. Now, I had been using this method for 10 years. My cycles were fairly consistent in that, I do ovulate every cycle. The date is shifting around, but, I have a very clear and obvious window of fertility. When I have mucus, it's apparent. And so what I'm saying is that I knew exactly when to try. So it was very straightforward. After you've been using fertility awareness for 10 years, it's super easy to know, okay, so these are the days that we have sex on. So, we had sex on the days and I didn't get pregnant the first month. And that was kind of weird. I was kind of like, oh, this is different, right? Like the anticipation, all this time we've been avoiding and nothing happened. And then the second month came. And again, I didn't get pregnant. I got my period. And so from what I recall, it's been a long time now. That was several years ago, but I believe we started trying maybe in like November or something like that. And then I didn't actually get pregnant until February. So for those of you who've been trying to conceive for a really long time, I'm sure you're just like, well, that's not very long. And I appreciate that. I'm just sharing this because I want you to kind of think about this. For those of you who have never tried, who maybe are on hormonal contraceptives still or have just come off, for a healthy woman that wasn't on hormonal contraceptives for the past 10 years, it took me about 3 or 4 cycles to conceive the first time. And then I had a miscarriage immediately after. So I got pregnant, and then a week after my period would have came. So you're technically 5 weeks pregnant at that point, which is really interesting because your first week of pregnancy is actually considered like the first week of your period. So technically I was 5 weeks pregnant, but so 3 weeks after ovulation, I actually miscarried. So it was really, really early on. It was super heavy bleeding / intensely painful experience. But again, this was not what I thought this would look like, right? I mean, I knew all this stuff about my cycles. I had been charting for so long. I knew exactly when to try. Not only did it take me several months to conceive, but then I miscarried right away. And so the reason that I'm sharing this story with you, and so then just to finish the story in case you're curious, so then I actually did conceive on the next cycle after that. And then I had a lovely baby 9 months later who is now 4.5. So I just wanted to share that with you because I want you to kind of have that in mind, that we just don't know. Not every single cycle is one that you can conceive. Maybe it's something with the sperm. Maybe it's something with the egg. Maybe it's something with the mucus. Maybe it's something with the lining. Maybe it's something with the air. I don't know. But that's something to keep in mind. Not every single cycle is necessarily going to result in pregnancy. And even if you have never taken hormonal contraceptives, that doesn't even mean that you're going to get pregnant immediately. You could. There's a chance, right? And so I want to share something with you then from a more scientific perspective. So that's my personal experience, right? Like N of one, a clinical study of one person. But there's an interesting study that I found that actually compares all of these different contraceptive methods. So when you stop these different contraceptive methods and then start to try how many months it took for these women to get pregnant. And so I won't go through all of them. There's a whole bunch of stuff listed, but I'm going to go through non-hormonal methods, and then the oral contraceptive pill, and then the injection, because that was pretty severe. So what the study found was that women who were using non-hormonal methods like the condom, it took them an average of about 3 to 4 months for them to conceive. So we don't know how many cycles that is for each woman. That could be different. But non-hormonal birth control, 4 months on average to conceive. Women who were coming off of hormonal contraceptives, specifically the pill, on average, it was taking about 7 to 8 months. So the women who were coming off of hormonal contraceptives on average took about twice as long as women who had never been on them. And then for women who were coming off of the shot, so like Depo-Provera, the injection, that was the most kind of startling result. Actually, the injection and the implant together, but the injection on average, it was taking between 13 and 15 months. So it took women who were coming off Depo 4 times as long to conceive, approximately. And then the implant was 10 to 12 months in this particular study. So a year or more compared to the women who weren't using hormonal contraceptives, which took about 3 to 4 months. So I feel like this is information that we need to know as women. It's not in our heads, it's in the research, and it's also in the client work that I do. I see it. And when it's really interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I divide the groups that I do. So in my group programs that I host, several times a year, what I do is when I'm able to, I divide my ladies into 2 groups. One, my ladies who are actively trying to avoid pregnancy, and the other, my ladies who are actively trying to conceive. And although the information is the same, as you can imagine, different conversations arise in those groups. And so for my ladies that are trying to avoid pregnancy, we are talking about the strictest application of the fertility awareness method so that it is effective as a method of birth control. And so we go through all the scenarios where you have to consider yourself potentially fertile, how to manage those periods of time, when you give yourself what's called a count of 3 in the method that I teach. What are the situations where you have to consider yourself fertile for a period of time, why you're considered fertile, going into all of the kind of physiological reasons, the role that mucus plays in all of this. And so the conversations that we have, it's very conservative. All of these times when you have to consider yourself to be potentially fertile. And for women who are trying to conceive, women who I work with, when they're having sex on their, fertile days and not conceiving kind of month after month, I mean, obviously there's something broader going on there. There's often challenges specifically that we're working on together to improve their fertility overall and to get to the bottom of what is causing the fertility challenges. But it's really, even as an educator from my perspective, to have these 2 conversations going on, at the same time, whereas one woman is so scared because she had withdrawal on a day that really isn't fertile, or used withdrawal on a day that isn't even within a count of 3, like an infertile day. And she's super scared that she might conceive. And then, to have another conversation with a woman who's actively having unprotected sex with her partner on her fertile days, and, she's getting her period. So the reason that I share these 2 different perspectives with you, and the reason that I want to talk about this point just to start, is that we really have to align our expectations with the reality. And the first part is to acknowledge that we don't know what's going to happen. There's always a chance that you can go off of hormonal birth control and your period is going to come back right away, or that you'll conceive right away. There is a chance. But as you can tell by the research study that I was talking about, the average overall is longer. So if you're on hormonal contraceptives of some kind, you can expect it to take longer to get pregnant. It doesn't mean it will, but you should expect it, because that's what the research tells us. The research tells us that you can expect it to take at least twice as long, depending on which type of hormonal birth control method that you were using, at least twice as long as it would for you to come off of hormonal birth control on average. And so since you don't know whether you're going to be the one to get your period right away or whether it's going to take you a while to recover from coming off of those hormones, then this is something that you want to take into consideration. And so that brings me back to my initial point, which is how I started this episode, to say that from my perspective, knowing that information, it is unethical to assume or to counsel women based on the assumption that their periods are going to come back right away and that they're going to conceive right away. It's unethical because it doesn't reflect the research that has been done in this area. And it also doesn't reflect the reality that women are experiencing just in general. And so what I want to share with you now are 4 factors that are going to have an impact on how quickly your fertility is going to return. So these aren't the only factors. These are 4 factors that I'm identifying. And as I said 4, I actually thought of a 5th one. So maybe we'll go through 5 instead. I just want to kind of paint this picture. So these are factors that are going to influence how quickly your fertility returns after coming off of hormonal contraceptives. So, one of them is the duration, how long that you've used hormonal contraceptives. One of the interesting things about the research that has been done in this area is that they often don't necessarily, some of the research studies don't necessarily quantify how long the women have used hormonal contraceptives. So I do prefer studies that compare, short-term to long-term use, and actually are looking at long-term use, specifically long-term use being, say, 10 years or more, so that we can really see if the duration of use is impacting the delay in the return of fertility. But essentially, the longer that you've used hormonal contraceptives, the more years that you've been on it, it does increase the chance that it's going to take a little longer for your cycles to resume normally. So although you might get your period right away, from my perspective, as a holistic reproductive health practitioner, fertility awareness educator, because I can see your charts and know right away if they're healthy or not, it's not enough just to say, oh, my period came back, even though that is awesome. We want your period to come back, but we also want to know what your cycles look like. What are those parameters? Do you have healthy mucus? Is your luteal phase long enough? Because it's not just about having your period. Your cycles have to be healthy in order to sustain a pregnancy, because it's all connected. Okay, so duration of use, how long you were on it. The second one that I want to mention is what your periods looked like before you went on it. So if you can remember what your previous cycles looked like before you ever used hormonal contraceptives, so what's really, really interesting, a trend that I've seen, the more that I delve into the research, is that, whenever studies are done to basically see how long it takes women to conceive after coming off of hormonal birth control, or studies that show how long it takes for women to start cycling again or for them to have their periods back, what I often see is that there's usually a small percentage of women who it takes a really long time for their cycles to come back, or certain women whose cycles haven't returned by the end of the study. So it's not super common. It's not like most women don't get their periods back. That's not a thing. But there's always a small percentage of women who don't, or at least don't right away, or don't get them back for an extended period of time. And so what the conclusion is often in the research is that for women whose periods don't come back right away, or women whose periods don't come back at all, they often say, well, it's not the pill. They're very quick to say that it's not the pill. And I don't necessarily believe that the pill caused that, because that isn't really the complete answer. They're quick to say that the pill didn't cause it because there was an underlying issue that was going on. That is the real cause of the delay in the return to fertility, or the amenorrhea that she's experiencing. And then there's always a caveat that says, so women that have these potentially pre-existing conditions where they're not ovulating regularly, maybe they're only ovulating 3 or 4 times a year, maybe they just were put on the pill because of that, because their cycles, they never knew when they were getting their period and they'd only have 3 or 4 periods a year. Those women then shouldn't be put on the pill, because obviously it's they're more likely to have this situation where their periods are delayed in returning, or they don't come back at all. Okay, so that was kind of a ramble, but basically what I'm saying is that the research would suggest that if you have an irregular cycle to begin with, the pill is contraindicated for you because you would be then more likely not to get your periods back quickly after coming off of it, or potentially having amenorrhea for a period of time. And so that actually the pill didn't cause that, but what's happening is that there's a reason. If you're only ovulating and having a period like 4 times a year, that's a problem. That's not normal. And there's a reason for that. There's something that's causing it. There's some sort of underlying issue that is causing this problem. And so the pill doesn't fix that issue. It masks it. And so essentially, the longer that you're on the pill, the more that whatever it is that is the actual problem is just going on in the background. And it's just, festering, if you will. And then when you come off of hormonal birth control, that hasn't been fixed. So then, of course, it's going to be worse because now it's been 10 years. So then the second would be the first was how long you've been on the pill. And then the second is what your previous cycles were like. And so if your previous cycles were irregular, then that's going to increase your chance that your periods might take a while to come back normally. So the third point that I want to mention is age. And so the older you are, there's a big difference, if you're 23 versus if you're 36. And so as you get into even in your early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, you really want to take this into consideration because your fertility in your mid 30s is not the same as it was in your early 20s. It is different. And that's just a natural process. That is not necessarily a problem. Eventually, our fertility does wane, and we do know that. And that's not necessarily a problem, but we need to know it and acknowledge it. So another factor is age. And so if you are now in your late 30s, 36, 37, 38, 39, and you've been on hormonal contraceptives now for 15 to 20 years, well, you have kind of 2 of those compounding factors, which is 1, that you've been on hormonal contraceptives for a really, really long time, and 2, that you are now 36 or 37. And so that would potentially increase the chance that your cycles may take a bit longer to come back normally, just because you're at an advanced age, or it could potentially take you longer to conceive. It doesn't mean it will. We're talking kind of risk here. And then, the fourth that I wanted to mention are individual differences. And so there's just something there where women are just, different. It's the same. Sometimes I have my clients, they'll ask me, why is it that my friends can eat whatever junk they want and they don't have any problems getting pregnant? But for me, here I am avoiding gluten and dairy and soy and, eating all organic food and all of this stuff. And I'm not conceiving. And so there is something to be said for individual differences and sensitivities. So there's certain challenges that I've had in my life that maybe you don't have. I have wondered, why did I get a hypothyroid? Like, why am I hypothyroid? Why did I have a thyroid issue? I had to give up gluten too to help me to manage my thyroid condition. And I mean, I don't find it to be useful to dwell on those things. We all have different challenges. So where I have this, condition, there's other areas that I'm totally fine in, that other women struggle with so much. And so we all have our own individual challenges. And so that's kind of a wild card because you just don't know. For some women, their periods just come back right off the bat and they're just ovulatory and their cycles fall into line fairly quickly. And others, it doesn't come back and it takes a longer time. So these are, 4 factors. And just a 5th one that I thought of to throw in is if you do have some sort of condition, like some underlying condition. So if you do have something like PCOS, if you do have a thyroid disorder, if you do have some sort of food sensitivity allergy, if you have IBS or Crohn's or some sort of autoimmune condition, all of those things are hits to your health and your fertility overall. So any of those 5 factors, that's going to impact, how long it's going to take for your fertility to return after coming off of hormonal contraceptives. So as you can see, it's not necessarily the pill itself, but it's really these different factors that are going to determine how your body is able to cope with this transition period. And so that's something that I want you to take from the podcast, which is that when you come off of hormonal birth control, there is a very real transition period that happens. That's the piece of this conversation that's missing. That's why at the beginning of the podcast, when I gave you the example of clients of mine who've gone to their physicians and said, should I come off of the pill early? And they say no. that comes from this either lack of understanding or lack of acknowledging this very real transition period that happens when you come off of hormonal birth control. There's a period of time that you have to transition where your cycles are really wonky and they're kind of sorting themselves out to when your cycles are robust and healthy. So from my experience, you can definitely tighten up that window by supporting your body really well right off the bat. Really focusing and creating a really great, nutrient dietary plan where you're getting the nutrients that you need to support your body and your health. You're identifying any potential stressors that are adding insult to your fertility and your health. For instance, if you're sensitive to certain foods, if you do have a certain underlying condition that's contributing to your cycle parameter issues, if you're able to identify those things and address them, then that helps you to tighten up that transition period. But either way, everyone is going to have one. I have never seen a woman come off of hormonal birth control and immediately have perfect cycles. So that isn't something that happens. Even if her cycles return fairly quickly, and even if the period of time, they're 28 days, when you look at the actual chart, the parameters take several cycles before the parameters are normal. So for women who come off of hormonal contraceptives, it does take several cycles before your parameters look normal. And so there's something else that I wanted to share with you. There's another study that specifically looked at cycle parameters. And so this study was really interesting to me. So, what they did is they had a group of women who had been on hormonal contraceptives. So there was a group of 85 women who had come off of hormonal contraceptives, and they monitored 12 cycles off of hormonal contraceptives and quantified the cycle parameters. So they were looking at the cycle length. They were looking at the length of the luteal phase and the follicular phase, and they divided out the cycle to really analyze the parameters of it. And then they had a group of 158 women as the control group. And so for these women, they weren't on hormonal contraceptives. And so what you see in the study is that when you look at the cycles from this perspective, which is this perspective that I look at cycles from, which is not just how long it took someone to get pregnant or not just whether or not they got their period back, but really looking at their cycles a little bit more in-depthly and determining how long it takes coming off of hormonal contraceptives for your cycles to be healthy and robust, for the parameters to fall within a normal range. What this study found was that it took about 8 to 9 cycles before the women who had come off of hormonal birth control, before their cycles looked pretty much the same as the women who had never been on hormonal contraceptives. So I want you to think about that for a minute, because I did say 8 cycles. I didn't say 8 months. And so for any of you who've been charting, you'll know that your cycles can fluctuate, especially coming off of the pill or something like that. Maybe your first cycle is 42 days. Maybe you have one that's 38 days. Maybe you have one that's, 27 days. But either way, 8 cycles for one woman might be 8 months, but 8 cycles for another woman may be, 12 months, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, even 2 years, depending on how long it took for her first period to come after coming off of hormonal birth control. And so that is something that is really important. That means that there is a transition period that has been identified in the research. Whether you're looking at the time it takes women to conceive after coming off of hormonal contraceptives, or whether you're looking at how long it takes for their cycles to be healthy, robust, and normal, there is a lag time. There is a period of time, a transition period, as I would like to call it, where it takes your cycles some time to get back to normal. Now, my issue is that if you don't know that, then your expectations are not aligned with the reality of the situation. Again, that was 8 cycles on average. So that means some women's cycles would have fallen within the normal range a little sooner, and some women, their cycles would have fallen in line a little bit, a little bit later. So this brings us to something that I refer to as the cascade of interventions. As you can imagine, and I've seen this a lot. It goes back to kind of like the first episode of the podcast. Like it goes back there, which is the overarching theme of what I do here is to really provide some of that education that we were not given in junior high. So the things that we didn't know about our cycles, we didn't know how these things worked. And, ultimately that has been a theme that has run through the podcast. So what we were taught essentially is that we could get pregnant on any day of our cycle. and there's no safe days. And if you have unprotected sex, you will get pregnant that cycle. So, I mean, that sets us up for kind of a misalignment between what's actually happening in our bodies as we get older and our expectations of what's going to happen. And so when people talk about aging and that type of thing, it seems as though we think as women that we still think we're fertile all the time and we can get pregnant just all the time. But at some point, it just stops. I don't think we really consider this gradual decline of fertility type idea. And so it doesn't necessarily dawn on us that it could take several months to conceive. It just doesn't really dawn on us that that is what it could look like. And so then what I find is that as women, when we come off of hormonal birth control, the expectation, because it's been programmed into our brains, is that as soon as we have unprotected sex, we're gonna get pregnant. Like, definitely, because, you've spent your whole life avoiding this. So obviously, if you had to be so vigilant to avoid pregnancy, that has to be because you're going to get pregnant, like, just immediately, and it's going to happen right away. And so what I find is that this sets us up for interventions. If you don't know that it takes an average of 8 cycles before your menstrual cycles are healthy and robust, if you don't know that women coming off of the pill take twice as long to conceive, based on the other study that I talked about, which was, the women in the study on average took 8 months to conceive. And then, other forms of birth control were even longer. So if you don't have that frame of reference, then you start to panic after month 2. So you go off of hormonal birth control in February. By April, you're panicking. You're in your doctor's office and your doctor's scheduling IUI. And interesting, there's a lot of research that has been done about IUI. So IUI, with the Clomid shot, Clomid has been associated with some very not good for fertility outcomes. And so Clomid has this effect that has been shown in the research to thin out your uterine lining, so thinning your endometrial lining, and also drying up your cervical mucus. So these are two things that are not helpful when you're trying to conceive: less mucus and a thin lining. These are counterproductive for the fertility conversation. So from my perspective, this miscommunication around what to expect when coming off of hormonal contraceptives, it sets you up to go down a train of interventions. So you come off of hormonal birth control right before you're trying to conceive. You didn't know that it could take several months, and it does. In the research, it does take several months on average to conceive after coming off of it. So by month 2, you're freaking out. You think your body's broken and you're ready to do anything because you waited to this point to get pregnant. You've been waiting your whole life and now you're finally ready. And so it has to happen now. So then you go to your doctor, you end up getting IUI. IUI has somewhere between a 10 and 15% success rate. For what it costs, it's incredible that that's the success rate, but that's the success rate. So IUI to me is it's a good option in certain situations potentially, but then from my perspective, I wonder how it could be better than timed intercourse. So I have my own questions around IUI. But anyways, you get the IUI. 10% success rate. So I often, will speak to women who've had, not one round, but several. So 1 round, 2 round, 3 round, 5 rounds, that didn't work. So all that time, then, as I mentioned, IUI has been shown to have this negative effect on fertility. So after your mucus is kind of dried up and then your, endometrial lining is thinner, that doesn't help you to conceive. So that sets you right up for IVF, right? So, just this one thing of not knowing what to expect when you come off of hormonal birth control, not knowing that there's a transition period where it actually does take time for your body to go back to its normal, robust, and healthy self. If you are missing that piece of the puzzle and you don't know, and your expectations are totally out of whack because you just expected your periods to come back perfectly right away and you expected to get pregnant immediately, this is setting you up to need all these interventions. Okay, so I painted this dark, gloomy picture. It's what I see, so it's important to talk about that. Someone has to. So I am. What do you do about it? Now I just want to share with you a few things that you can do in terms of preparing your body for pregnancy with this knowledge, especially if you've recently come off of hormonal contraceptives or if you're thinking about coming off of them, especially now after everything we've spoken about. And so as kind of an intro into those things that I want to talk to you about, one of the things that I've spoken about on the show several times, but I feel to bring up here as well, is that ultimate disconnect between this trend these days to lead a healthy lifestyle. There's so much talk about buying organic food and reducing our processed food consumption, eating real food, going on a paleo diet, all of this stuff that we can do, getting more exercise, getting, good amounts of rest, doing yoga, stress management, all of that stuff. But you're taking a hormonal contraceptive pill every day. All I can say is that we are so desensitized to this thing that we don't really think about what it's doing. If you went to a restaurant and they served you chicken that stopped you from menstruating, you wouldn't eat the chicken. Like you wouldn't eat it because you would know that there's something wrong with that chicken. But taking a pill that actually stops us from having a regular period, stops us from ovulating, we don't think about that as an endocrine disruptor. So any of my long-term listeners will know I've spoken a lot about xenoestrogens and the negative impact that they have on our bodies and our hormones. Well, whatever you think is happening in that hormone meat that you buy from the store, the conventional meat and dairy products that have been laced with hormones and antibiotics and all that stuff, whatever benefit that you feel that you're getting from eating hormone-free meat, and I know I eat hormone-free meat, I found that to be a really integral part of my own process in getting rid of my period pain and stabilizing my menstrual cycles. But whatever effect that is doing for you by taking the pill, like it kind of like it's helpful to not bombard, like it's helpful to take that away, but then you're taking the pill and the pill is how many times stronger because it makes you stop bleeding or it makes you stop ovulating. Anyways, so that first part I wanted to share just to kind of get our heads around like the pill and what it's actually doing to our bodies and how if we're really trying to integrate a healthy lifestyle, the pill is not part of that. Like I recognize we need to have the choice. And I've said on the podcast many times, I don't think there's never a reason to use the pill. I wouldn't ever say that because there are times I've used it. Most of women that I know have used it at some point. I just feel like when we have more knowledge and information, especially when we get into our reproductive years, when we want to start a family, we need to then just look at it a little bit differently, because once we switch that mindset to kind of life creating, like I want to get pregnant, I want to have a healthy pregnancy and a baby, you want to get pregnant easily, you want to save yourself, $15,000 by not having to do IVF. And so you really want to set yourself up in the best possible way. And so the pill doesn't have a place in that picture of setting yourself up in the best possible way. Okay. So what do you do? So the first thing, my suggestion, and, this is based on 2-3 years of podcasting, all the interviews that I've recorded with my guests. If you're new to the show, a really great episode to listen to is episode 100. That was a compilation of a ton of episodes that I did. I picked out different bits and pieces from what my different guests have said. And so ultimately, combined with, the knowledge that I've gained from the research that I've done, working with the Fertility Friday community, my amazing clients, my one-on-one clients and my group program clients, as well as just all of the interviews that I've done. I've spoken to, well over 100 people, somewhere between like 120 to 150 people who specialize in fertility in their respective fields. And so, my suggestion is if you're able to, so in my perfect world, and I recognize this isn't going to be a reality for some of you listening, but my perfect world is that you really should give yourself anywhere from 2 to 3 years lead time. So when you want to conceive in the future, if it's possible, you're going to want to come off the hormones about 2 to 3 years ahead of time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Some of you might be listening and thinking like, well, that's a little bit ridiculous. My doctor told me that I don't need to come off early at all. Well, yeah, that's what doctors say. The reason that I feel that way is because of what I see. And it's because, again, we don't know what's going to happen. So I feel like it's better to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And so we don't know if your period is going to come back right away. We don't know. And we don't know how long it's going to take. And we don't know. And then that's just one part of it. Your period comes back, but we don't know how long it's going to take for your cycles to go back to normal, become robust and healthy. And also, we don't know how long it's going to take you to conceive. But if you come off of the pill way before you're trying, so you're like not trying, then you're giving your body lots of time. You're giving yourself a really good cushion for your body just to rebound. And now that you have all of this amazing information and you recognize what a healthy cycle looks like, and you can chart your cycles and you can know if your cycles are healthy or not, that gives you more than enough time to figure it all out. And not only to recover from the pill, but also to give yourself time to prepare your body for pregnancy, to build up your nutrient stores. If you're new to the podcast, I would definitely encourage you to go back and have a listen to the episode that I recorded with Sally Fallon. This was one of the very first episodes that I recorded, and it's episode 9 with Sally Fallon Morel. And she, in that interview, talks about, from a traditional ancestral perspective, how our ancestors would prepare our bodies for pregnancy and the type of diet that they would be eating. And it's a very, hormone supportive, fertility boosting diet where you're really nourishing your body and building up your nutrient stores. I've said it on the show before, nothing steals nutrients from your body like a baby. When you have that type of perspective and you really go into this pregnancy mindfully and intentionally, then, not only are you able to, conceive in the best case scenario naturally and carry and sustain a pregnancy, but in addition to that, once you have your baby and your baby is up all night and your baby requires all of your time and energy, you're not 100% depleted. I'm also sharing this with you as a mom. I have 2 kids, and I can tell you that there's nothing more beautiful and simultaneously challenging than being a mom and having a little person rely on you for everything. The amount of time and energy, I remember when I was pregnant, both times actually, and I was at my day job. And people would always say this to me, like, oh, you must be so excited to have a year off, because in Canada we have a year of maternity leave. So they would say a year off. And I would just kind of laugh to myself. When I had my first son, the first 4 to 5 months of his life were literally the hardest 4 to 5 months of my life. Like, I had never had a time in my life where I had I didn't have more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep in a row for like 4 months, because he was getting up in the night. And I remember feeling so exhausted. Like, it's kind of like that exhausted place you get where you're kind of delirious, like you're talking to yourself and you're laughing for no reason. Like, I felt crazy. And so when you're going into that type of situation, which again, it's beautiful, but come on, it's also very real. It's also very challenging. You want to position yourself in the best way possible. Another thing that I learned along the way, when you're able to really take that time to support your body, to replenish and build up your nutrient stores, in preparation for pregnancy, get your gut health sorted out, throw in some fermented foods, really make sure you're getting enough healthy fats, eating organ meats, and other nutrient-dense foods specifically to build up your stores of iron, of B12, of B6, of just all of the nutrients that you need to have a healthy baby, and all of the, healthy fats that you need to make hormones. You produce a ton of hormones when you're pregnant, and you need to produce a ton of hormones to sustain that pregnancy. What happens is that, you're setting yourself up to have healthier children, and healthier children sleep better. And I don't know if that sounds like a really kind of harsh thing to say, or I don't mean it that way, but I guess just from the perspective as a mom, I really, coming out on the other end, it makes such a profound impact to go about this really intentionally, and to set yourself up for the easiest pregnancy possible, to set your kids up for, to be the healthiest they can be. I would invite you to really consider that 2 to 3 year lag time, even if it sounds like a lot, if you're able to. That's where the preparation part comes in, right? Because if you've just recently come off of hormonal contraceptives, you might not have that lead time, and that's okay. You just focus on what time you have and start working towards it now. So if that's the perfect world scenario, but all of us don't have that. So you just find a way to do what you can with the time that you do have. Now, with that being said, here I am telling you to go off of hormonal birth control before you're ready to get pregnant. So some of you are kind of like, well, how do I prevent pregnancy, without during this time? So obviously I've spoken a ton about fertility awareness on the show. So I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/fertility awareness. And I've linked all of my fertility awareness specific episodes there to give you like a really good background on the fertility awareness method. And so the good news is that there are ways to manage your fertility naturally. So whether you're using fertility awareness by itself, whether you're using it in combination with a barrier method like condoms, or if you're, using a cervical cap or a diaphragm, or, withdrawal. I've done a couple episodes where we talk about using withdrawal alongside fertility awareness. It just depends on really your intention. So if you're really intent to avoid pregnancy, it's really helpful to learn the fertility awareness method by an educator like myself, so that you can be really, really confident in identifying which days you can get pregnant on, which days that you can have unprotected sex on and not get pregnant. But whatever your mindset was, say if you went on hormonal contraceptives when you were 16 or 17 or, 19 or 20, and now, you find yourself, your late 20s, early 30s, and you kind of worry like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get pregnant right away. Trust me, you can do this. You can do this. You're an adult, you're a grown woman, and you do so many complicated things every day in your job, in your lives. So don't doubt your ability to do this. If you really want to do this, you can do it, and you can do it effectively, and you can use this method confidently and avoid pregnancy. As I alluded to, I used the method successfully for 10 years, before I was ready to start trying for a baby. And there was never any accidents or slip ups. Like if you really want to do this, you can do it. Trust me. I believe in you. And if you need support, make sure to check out my programs, because I offer that. If you're wanting to get that extra support so that you can leave feeling really, really confident in using the method for birth control. Okay. And then the last thing I already touched on, but essentially the nutrition piece of it. So when you come off of hormonal birth control, or even before you come off of it, if possible, you really want to pay close attention to your nutrition. So, in a perfect world, you could actually act like you're pregnant, at least to some degree. Of course, if you're giving yourself 2 years lead time, that might be a little bit much in terms of not allowing yourself to drink if you want to drink, or, whatever it is. But you really want to have that mindset that you're taking the time to replenish your body's nutrient stores. Hormonal birth control has been linked to a number of nutrient deficiencies, particularly B vitamins like vitamin B12, B6, and folate. And other nutrients like zinc and magnesium, even coenzyme Q10, which is really disconcerting. So there's a lot of nutrients specifically that are depleted, as you use hormonal birth control. And as the longer that you stay on it, these nutrient deficiencies are magnified. So those are the big things. How to prepare your body for this transition period, how to think about coming off of birth control. When should you come off of it in a perfect world scenario? And ultimately, everything that has brought me to this point has led me to that conclusion. If you actually are able to take 2 to 3 years beforehand, before you're even trying, that is an ideal situation. And that sets you up for kind of the best scenario possible, which is really being ready, and not just emotionally, your body being ready. Your body having all of these nutrient stores, and sets you up for healthy pregnancy, optimal fertility, and also in the postpartum for you to have the energy and the health that you need to take care of your new baby. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. As I mentioned, I obviously had some things on my chest that I wanted to share with you all. These are topics that have been coming up in my client work, and these are things that have been coming up in my interviews. And I just really wanted to share this with you. I just wanted to come on air and just share this with you, because I believe that this shift in thinking really has to happen at some point. I really hope that in my lifetime, our thinking around hormonal birth control, the way that we're advised to use it, the way that the potential impacts on fertility are minimized, I really hope that these things change with time. As you can see, given the way that I think about this scenario, and in my kind of perfect world scenario where you're really giving yourself distance from this hormone thing before you're trying to conceive, as you can imagine, that's really going to reduce the chance that you would need to use assisted reproductive technology. So this isn't to say that there's anything wrong with it, but I know, few women that's their preferred route for pregnancy. I don't think I've ever met anybody who that is their preferred, like, I want IVF. I don't want to get pregnant naturally. I want, like, you see what I'm saying? It's kind of funny to say out loud, but I don't know anybody who that's their preferred route. So I feel like, if anything, if you're able to stack the deck in your favor, and it doesn't mean that even all of that, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get pregnant naturally. Even all of that. There's lots of women who for various reasons are not able to get pregnant naturally. But with that being said, of course, doing something like this, and as you can just think about from, everything I've spoken to you about today, that in a sense, it's really setting you up in the best way possible and helps you to minimize the chance that you're going to need IVF. One of the things that I offer, if you're listening and you're really wanting to learn fertility awareness, or you're wanting some support charting because you're not really sure how to interpret your charts, or if everything's normal and you're really wanting to improve some of those parameters naturally, one of the things I offer is a free 15-minute consult. If you have questions about the programs, or if you have questions about what it's like to work with me, and you kind of want to go through that a little bit more, this is an option. This is a natural option to give yourself that space for your body to transition with a huge time cushion, so that if you do have challenges, if you do see that there's something going on with your cycle, if your period doesn't come back for a really long time after you come off of hormonal birth control, then you have given yourself a big time window to handle anything that comes within that time period, so that by the time you're ready to conceive, you have it sorted out. So I just want to thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm really excited that I was able to share this with you today. I think it's really important information. If you did enjoy this episode and you found it valuable, and you know someone in your life who also could benefit from hearing it, please share it. I would really be honored if you were to share the show with them. And so if you're listening on your iPhone, or on your Android, iTunes, or Stitcher, or wherever you're listening to, there's a way for you actually just to go and share it right there. So you can text or email or WhatsApp or whatever. It gives you all the different options to share it. And if you're new to the show, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, I have tons of back episodes. If you want to listen to that, you can find all the episodes at fertilityfriday.com/episodes. I have just a list of all of the episodes there. And also, if you enjoyed this episode and you're wanting to connect with other women who are using the fertility awareness method, charting, and also to jump in and join really interesting conversations around fertility, the fertility awareness method, all those types of things, then I would invite you to join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook group. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/community, and you'll be redirected to the Facebook group in there. And of course, if you're wanting to go deeper into this topic and you're wanting to work with me one-on-one to gain confidence in your charting, whether you're wanting to use it for birth control, or whether you're wanting to time sex, accurately if you're trying to conceive, or whether you just need more information about your cycle and how everything works together, and you're really wanting some help interpreting your charts and improving your fertility naturally, you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. As I mentioned earlier, if you have questions about my programs, you can certainly set up a 15-minute consultation free of charge, and you can do that on the Work With Me page as well. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune in and supporting the show. You're the reason why I podcast. I've gotten such wonderful feedback from all of you over the years, and I really enjoy connecting with you in the Facebook group. It just helps me to know that you're out there and you're listening, and that it's making a difference in your life. So thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.